So here's the PDF for the compact purse, the GW. You can see all the patterns with stitching holes. And the important thing here is how to print this pattern. So I'm going to show you here in a second. You go to File, Print, and that's my laser printer right there. I go to Properties, Portrait, that's fine. And paper quality, I changed mine to thicker paper because my laser printer, if I choose regular, the toner will smear. It doesn't look good and it just can't work with it. For the layout, I click Advanced and I change the paper size to A4. So this pattern is set for A4 paper, just remember that. And then you see for the size options, it's actually actual size on the left there, which I'm not really clicking there. And then pages here, I didn't print all the pages. I went 2 through 10, so it didn't print the title page, so I didn't waste paper. And I printed it out. And then that's what I'm showing here again, actual size. Don't do fit because the pattern holes, the stitching holes will be incorrect and it's just a mess. Okay, so now that you've printed the pattern, you're just going to cut on the outside about 1/4 of an inch outside the pattern, just a coarse cut. You don't have to be precise because we're going to tape this down to the leather, and then we'll punch all the holes and then we'll cut all the lines exactly. The gusset here, it's printed on one page, but you know, it's too long for one page, so you have to join it in the center. You have to cut that exactly, line up the little scissors as you can see there, tape it together, and there you go. This is a sample from the leather I'm using. It's about 1.6 millimeters thick, so that's what I used, and it's good for a purse. So here I'm taping the pattern down to some brown leather, obviously. But later I decided I like the vegtan because I can dye it whatever I want. And here are all my patterns, the big ones at least, on the vegtan. And I'm just coarsely cutting out the patterns. And then later, like I said, I'm going to punch the holes and then cut exactly on the lines. Now, this is my press from Harbor Freight. I have this Chinese hole punching thing. I don't know. They normally work pretty well, but I think this one was separating. The welds were not good, and so it wasn't that sharp either. I used it quite a bit. And they work for what they are. I mean, they're not expensive, but you're better off buying an expensive or good quality punch. Anyway, I got the holes set up in my oval cutout or whatever for the zipper. So then I marked it there with a permanent marker, and I'm just lining it up with the ruler and cutting a few times because it's vegtan and this stuff's pretty thick, and then doing the same thing for the other side. And if you get any bumps or it's not uniform, you can take some sandpaper and sand that down to make it better, or, you know, appearance would look better. And that's obviously where your zipper's going to go. So that's pretty clean right there. So when you punch these stitching holes for the zipper, you have to use a single punch because in Illustrator, when I created this pattern, I said adjust the holes to fit around that oval. So don't try to use a stitching punch like a 5 millimeter because it's not going to work. And then right here, I'm actually using a 5 millimeter for the regular pattern, and it works fine. I use the 2-hole one because it's just easier. It goes through the leather a lot quicker. And now that I've done all the holes, I'm cutting exactly. And then I put some masking tape on there and then just continue cutting around the pattern. And then I put more tape just to make sure that the pattern doesn't come off. And then I cut the wrong line or whatever that's not lined up. And then you'll do this for every pattern that you cut. And here is a corner which is a little bit difficult, but I have a Japanese skiving knife, so I'm just kind of walking it along little straight cuts, which makes it rounded, and then you just sand it later. I don't have a an actual punch for that. And then here I'm just sanding the edges. Probably went a little overboard here. You don't have to do all the edges, only like the pocket that's going to be exposed that you can't get to later. So in this case, I just sand it all around, and then I bevel the edges front and back. And to make sure that your beveler is sharp, and that's what that little leather pad there is for. All right, so I have some royal blue pro dye here that I put in a little container, and I'm dyeing the vegtan because raw vegtan by itself it looks good for wallets, but for a big item like a purse, in my opinion, it picks up a lot of marks and dirt and just doesn't look good. So I'm using this pro dye. And the pro dye, by the way, just make sure you're outside when you use it because it stinks really bad, very strong. You need a well-ventilated area. Here I'm using atom wax on the pockets, zipper pockets, and then once it dries, I buff it out with a soft rag. I like the atom wax. It seems to work pretty well, but maybe I didn't do it correctly. I had some streaks, which I didn't like. But here I'm using toconol around the openings for the zipper. And it's basically a burnishing agent, which smooths down the edges of the leather when you use a wooden slicker or a canvas cloth. Here I'm using the slicker. And you need to do this now because you won't be able to once the zipper is in, obviously. But, sometimes you don't think about stuff like that. And here I'm just smoothing out the edges with a little sanding stick. And then I'll use toconol on that again, I'm sure. Well, beveling first. So sand, bevel, and then toconol, of course. And then you do the front and the back side. So here I'm doing the back side. And you can see the dye just looks kind of faded here on the back, which is not really that important, but anyway. I'm using some double stick tape. I didn't have the real skinny, thin tape that you can get at the dollar store. So I have this big giant roll that I had to cut down the size. It still works. Just a little bit awkward. Yeah, I thought I had speeded this up, this section, but I'm narrating now, obviously. But I didn't realize how torturous this was, the slowness anyway. So now, this is a zipper I got from Goodwill. It came in a big pack. Somebody donated it with some patterns and some other frilly stuff. I don't even know what it is. Somebody that made their own clothes, I guess. This is a 7-inch zipper, and then I'm going to cut it down to size. I believe it's 7-inch, 7 1/4, something like that. And I'm just marking the zipper here so I know which teeth to remove, and I'm just cutting in between those teeth. And then, of course, this is polyester, so it frays a lot. So you want to use a lighter to seal the edges. And I'm just kind of tidying it up. I'm actually removing extra teeth that I don't need so I can put on the little crimped edges, I guess you call it. Stops the zipper pull from coming off the tape. So this is what I was talking about, those little pieces of metal that you crimp on the tape. This is part of a kit from Amazon. It was not that expensive. Seems to work well, and the zipper doesn't come off, so that's what you want. And same thing here. This is the second pocket. Doing the same thing with the double stick tape. And then you want to align the zipper on the tape and center it in the hole, in the oval hole. Make sure that it looks good, because you don't want to spend all this time and then the zipper's not lined up. It just doesn't look professional, in my opinion, anyway. And now I'm taping it down just so that it doesn't move as I line it up here. and that seems to help quite a bit. It looks pretty good. And now I'm just removing the masking tape. And you can see I have too much of the zipper on the back side, the actual tape. So I'm just going to cut the excess off and use a lighter to seal the edges because it's polyester and it burns well. Same as the stitching thread, that's what we use as polyester. So now you want to punch the holes. I know the hole's already punched through the leather, but you need to punch through the zipper because if you try to sew it, the needle's going to get snagged on the zipper, on the actual polyester, and it's going to distort the zipper. It's not going to look good. So that's why we do this here. And then when you actually sew the zipper, so I go about 5 or 6 times the length of whatever I'm sewing. And then you just use the saddle stitch to sew the zipper. Just like everything in this project, it uses the saddle stitch. And if you don't know what that is or how to do it, it's quite easy. You can look on YouTube. There's probably hundreds of videos that explain how to do it, and that's what I'm doing here. Okay, so this part, this is the front pocket, obviously. I had to insert this into the video because I didn't explain in the main video how to install the clasp. And you want to do this before you install the front pocket on the front panel. So that's why I put this here. Just imagine that this is leather. And you're going to cut the 2 slits for the clasp. I got my clasp on Amazon, the vendor that makes it. I don't know if he went out of business, whatever. It's not available through them, but you can do a search on Amazon. You'll find the similar clasp. And if it's not the same width, you can always just adjust where your slits are going to be on the front pocket. So if this were leather, you just obviously cut down through the slits, and then I would insert the X-Acto knife and cut up a little bit, and then cut down a little bit, because otherwise those little tongs or whatever you call them on the clasp won't fit in. You're going to push it through the leather, and then just put the back piece on, and then you'll bend those tabs to the outside. If you bend them to the inside, it'll work, but it'll have more bulk. And then, you know, if you put your hand in the pocket, you'll feel it. What I did, I used duct tape on the inside of the pocket because it was for my wife, and this was like a prototype. But if you make this pocket, I would recommend putting a lining over the back of that, so to smooth out, so there's no snags or anything. And when you put your hand in the pocket, you won't really feel anything. You'll feel the little bump, but other than that, it won't catch on any of your objects that you put in that pocket. This is a stitching pony. It's made out of wood that holds the leather, and it doesn't mark it up or anything. Later, I used some scrap leather to glue to the wood so that it would hold the leather better, and it would act like a cushion. So that's all I'm doing is the saddle stitch here, and you can see I have little pins that hold the leather in place. You can get those online as well. They're a little bit expensive for what they are, but I find that they're worth it. And here's just more of me stitching. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. And so here's the corner of the pocket. I went back and stitched again, like forward and then back, just to secure it, make it so that the thread won't tear. And now I'm just tapping down the thread. And here I'm going to be putting the actual top part, or the flap of the purse. It's going to attach to this pocket. And this is pretty straightforward as well. You're just going to sew one line, from top to bottom, and then come back a few stitches, cut it, and then melt the thread with a lighter, and do the same thing for the second row there. I sped this up quite a bit because it can be kind of boring, I'm sure. And of course you can skip past this section if you want, if you don't want to see this. I'm just explaining, how to sew it. You could, I suppose, stitch down the one line and then go across and then stitch back up and then go up to the corner again. I mean, that would be a unique look, I guess. So, like I said, sped up quite a bit. Straightforward stitching, and if you want to skip past this. And here's a close-up of the stitching pony, just me explaining how to sew it. It's real simple. And if you've never made anything out of leather, this might be difficult for you, but once you do it, it's not an issue. And now I'm just tapping down the threads because it just looks better when you use a hammer to put the threads down, flatten them out. Just makes for a more uniform look. And then those are the 2 pockets that I completed. So we have 3 major parts here, and then the only other part is the gusset, which is the strip of leather that connects everything. So this is the D-ring leather holder, I guess. I don't know what you call that. I'm just scraping the leather so that when I put glue on there, it will adhere. I think it would probably stick anyway because it's pretty rough, even though I dyed it. So I'm putting some of this water-based glue. It's not like rubber cement that stinks and is difficult to work with. This stuff is, like I said, it's water-based. It's aquavim. That's what they call it. And I think German cobblers use it when they make shoes or repair shoes. So you just want to put that stuff on, let it dry for, 5-10 minutes, or use a heat gun. And I slip the D-ring on there because I'm going to seal that. Make sure you line them up with some needles or those little pins that I bought. The only thing I don't like about using glue is that it clogs up the stitching holes. And then after you sew, you get that goop everywhere on the thread and everything. So that's why I don't really like using glue. But I think it's necessary in this case just to keep those little pieces together so that when you sew it on the gusset, it's going to be easier. You don't have to mess with it too much. Now I'm just sticking 2 needles through the 2 left holes. A little bit off camera here, but it doesn't really matter which holes you line up, to be honest. You just want to start somewhere and continue around, but you want to make it look uniform. So I kind of started at the top, come back around, and I continue past the hole, a couple of holes. So that's why maybe start a little bit right of center, and when you come back up, you'll get a double stitch, and it'll look like it's centered. It'll look good. So this is quite easy, and you just trim the edges. Use a lighter to melt the polyester thread and then flatten it down so it's sealed and doesn't move. Now here's the gusset, the whole piece with both D-rings attached. And I'm just wetting the edges with some water since it's vegtan. And I recommend doing this because when you sew this thing to the main body, it's going to be a little bit difficult if you haven't shaped this leather here, the gusset. So just do both edges like that. I used those little paper clips or whatever with some leather on there to prevent marring. What do you call those? Binder clips, I guess. You don't have to do this. I mean, you can just form it with your hands just to make sure that it's bent and it keeps its shape. And I do the same thing for the other side. and I just took them off, so let it dry. And so you just start, at the top hole with the 2 needles and pull them through so that the thread is even, and then continue with the saddle stitch all the way around. It's straightforward. It's no tricks. The only issues that you might have will be the corners. Okay, I'm just showing the gusset in the corner there where I double stitched it, you can see, and then where I'd cut it there when it was finished. So that needs to be melted with the lighter, which I'm doing here. And then you just press it down, make it flat. I use my fingers. Some people might not like that, so you could use like a wooden handle from one of your tools to flatten that out. I'm just showing the whole gusset on one side. Like I said, the corners are kind of a pain. Here I'm trying to attach the final piece, or the back piece. Same thing as before. Line up the 2 needles, make sure the thread is even. This part is more complicated because you can't see that well because it's dark inside there, and you kind of want to have a light or hang that thing up on a stitching pony so that you can see what you're doing. But the difficult part, as I mentioned before, are the corners. But you can get past it. It's not really a big issue. You just need to make sure that the thread is nice and tight as you go around the corner, because you don't want it loose and then you've already passed that part and then you have to remove the stitching. It's just not a lot of fun. So I have a lot of thread here. Like I said, 5 or 6 times the length, so you're going to be pulling a lot of thread. And just work your way through it. It takes a while. It took me many hours to do this gusset, believe it or not. And there's my setup with the stitching pony. Just holding it up so that it's easier to stitch. And the bottom piece is sitting on the desktop there. And that's basically almost completed except for the hardware for the front flap. Everything's almost done, so this part is about the strap. This is optional. I mean, you need a strap, obviously, to carry a purse, right? A woman does. And this is a short strap that I just came up with. And I had quite the time trying to skive the edges. I'm not so good at skiving, and I did this a few times. But I just measured this out, and it's in the pattern. The length will tell you how long to cut it. I'm using a French edger here to remove some of the thickness at the ends instead of using that skiving knife right there. And you get a lot of waste there. And then I'm using this little razor blade thing, which for me didn't work that well. And I ended up messing up a few pieces. I had to start over multiple times. Now I'm trying to use a skiving knife. It does thin it out, but you got to be careful because you don't want to tear up the end. And so you want the edges clean as well. Use the beveler. Use both, or bevel both sides. And then I'm just adding this for decoration, cutting a groove. I adjusted it, I don't know, maybe 1/8 of an inch probably to cut that groove. And it's just to make a nice design. You got to be careful when you do this, because if you slip, you're going to have to get another piece of leather, start over. So I dyed it blue, obviously, because we want it to look the same as a purse. This part, I'm actually going to install the rivets so that I can put these swivel hooks in. And This was before I had made the pattern for the strap. So I was trying to find out or figure out where I wanted the holes, but you don't need to worry about that because in the pattern they are lined up and everything's there for you. You just have to cut a long length of the strap. I just show both the front and the top and the bottom ends. And here I'm just marking the holes with the awl. These hole punchers are really handy. I got this at a antique mall. This was like an old school puncher made in Germany, so it's super high quality. $10. So there's the swivel hook. I'm just trying to get it pressed down, and I'm using the existing holes to punch the other holes just to line it up. So these rivets, they work pretty well, but I think because they were so close to the swivel hook, I couldn't get the, what do you call it, the little stamp base or whatever. I couldn't get it to sit flat because the swivel hook was in the way. But they of course snap together properly. I had the right length of these, and I eventually got it, but it was just frustrating. And I guess next time if I make it, I would probably move the holes down a little bit. So you might want to do that. Consider that when you follow the pattern. See the base here. I mean, I don't have one of those expensive presses that will press those rivets in, and I think that's maybe why I had the problem. Just to let you know that on this pattern here, I move the holes and the fold over so that you have more space when you put the swivel hook, so that when you pound it down, you have room. You'll have room to actually do it, and I'm going to show you. So just an example. Remember, this is going to be a big long piece. Now you got some space. There's some space to pound that. Let's see, you want some small ones. Should be like this. This is going to be thicker leather, of course. Strap is done. I put more atom wax on here on the main purse, polishing it, and just cleaning it up because, I had my hands all over it and everything. It's pretty much done. I really like the royal blue color. I just don't know about the atom wax. Like I said, I get some streaks in. So here I'm explaining, which I had forgotten to include in the video, is the clasp hardware. So cut the oval in the leather, and then you just put those pieces together and bend those tabs back. And then this is the piece that goes on the main body on my right hand there. And there it is in all its glory. It was a labor of love, and it was definitely a labor. But it's a nice compact purse, and it will hold a lot of stuff in the little pockets. Thank you. And I hope your build goes well.